when I was 50, I finally discovered who I truly was, and I was able to begin fulfilling my life purpose, and that is to love and be loved. I mean, I think that's the ultimate expression of what human beings are about.
Hey guys, this is Ben Osterveld with the From Within the podcast. I have Greg Habstritt coming on the show here today. He's a very, very interesting, successful, deep human being. He's personally impacted me. I'll be talking to him about that. But what I wanted to share is he's done things that people just admire in business. He was way ahead of the curve with the events he's done. He filled stages. He had amazing Richard Branson on his stage. He's had the Dalai Lama. This guy is innovative and smart. I've always thought this guy is a real businessman. He took on the coaching business and killed it. Investments, financial planning business. He's a true innovator, marketing guy. But here's the thing. I could go on and on about his accomplishments, but he's now just started a website, and it's called unperfect.com. And I wanted to read his about page right here on the show because it's amazing. This is from within. This is not about what you've done. This is from within. So I've asked Greg to be on the show because he's got some transformation going on over the last couple of years, and he's openly sharing what's happening. So guys, I'm slightly dyslexic. I read things and write things backwards. If you ever see any of my posts, you're going to see spelling mistakes, and you're going to be like, hey, there's spelling mistakes. I'm going to be like, thank you, and I'm going to be like, damn it, at the same time. So guys, here's Greg's intro. It's a little bit different than normal, but I want to just read it here. It says, hey, I'm Greg, and I have a question for you. You know how everyone's got it figured out, and you're the only one who can get it together. You're the only one who can't get it together. Forgive me. Here's the truth. That's complete bullshit. Contrary to the story we've cobbled together in your head, that everyone else has it figured out and you're the only one that can't seem to get it together. Everyone is just trying to figure it out, to hold it together, not to run away from their life. Everyone is unperfect, and that's what makes it so extraordinary. We'll all in this together. We are all in this together if we are each willing to be honest about it. I know this because I'm the most unperfect person I know. I've fucked up a lot of things, hurt a lot of people, no more than myself. Routinely hidden who I really am, and just generally questioned where I was going most of my life. I substituted achievement, recognition, and winning for feeling connected to myself and others. I turned away from those who matter to me because the need to be right and to be seen as perfect were the dark forces that controlled me the most. Yes, throughout my life, I've also savored moments of knowing that I'm awesome. I felt it when I was being courageous and when I was telling the truth about something that was really hard to be honest about. I felt most of my life mastering the ability to hide behind external success, appearing confident and fearless, and strive to prove that I was simply perfect. And no matter how hard I tried to shovel more dirt into the hole, I could feel deep in my soul. The hole never filled up. In fact, somehow against all the laws of physics, it kept getting bigger and bigger. And as you might know, trying to fill a bottomless hole is exhausting. It took some very painful losses, failures, experiences to finally feel like I was being shaken by the shoulders and some invisible force was slapping my face and screaming, "Wake the hell up." I used to believe the greatest moment of my life was when my son Cooper was born, but I come to realize that the most important and special moment of my life was when I finally woke up. I decided to try something different. Here's the lessons I've learned. Life isn't about trying to change or hide who you are to meet the expectations and demands of the world. Life isn't about succeeding. Life is about feeling, about living who you really are and having the courage to do each of these things unconditionally. When you have the courage to reveal your imperfections to others and trust in them, those special elements pave the road to peace, alignment, and connection. And the idea of being a fiercely unperfect human became my vision for life. And as I've shared the idea with others, it seems to resonate. This concept is less about me and all about every human being that's striving to be more authentic, vulnerable, and to live a great life. So thanks for spending your time reading this, and I hope you find some inspiration and helpful information and resources here. Unperfectly yours, Greg. Guys, this is amazing. We've got Greg Habstritt on the show. I'm about to bring him in. This is called, his website is unperfect.com, and he is about to share his heart. This is incredible. Thanks, Greg, for being on the show. Let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome to From Within the podcast. We have Greg Habstritt here. Super pumped to have him here. He's an extremely interesting man. He's done a lot of things on this planet, and I feel like he's in kind of like this metamorphosis from being this top killer entrepreneur to being more of a connected, potentially spiritual, emotional man. And we've had some amazing conversations, and I cannot wait to share that. So Greg, you know what? Let's start out right now. Thank you so much for being on the show. Truly appreciate it. I'm honored, of course, for you to come on the show. Truly appreciate it.
Oh, glad to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So Greg, why don't we do this? For the people that don't know you, I know a lot of people know you. Let's do a brag for a second, okay? Like, I'm going to set you up. Instead of me trying to read off a script and fumble through dyslexia and all this crap, why don't you just tell me, like, what have you done in this world? Where's your brag points? What have you done? Like, I know that you're a serial entrepreneur. You've done we've had $100 million portfolio in real estate. You've done all kinds of stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about Greg's accomplishments?
Well, I think the greatest accomplishment is recognizing that, in your, just before a minute ago, you said, that I might even be spiritual or, that I've been in metamorphosis. The truth is, I think we're all in metamorphosis all the time, and it's just a matter of whether we're willing to recognize it. So, we all have the spiritual side. We all have the emotional side, the intellectual, and the physical. I mean, those are the four spaces that we occupy as human beings. And so it's just a matter of becoming aware of them and acknowledging them. So, in terms of accomplishments, you can write a bio and tag it to this because I don't know that it really is material. I think I've lived a life of, a crazy range of different businesses. I've had 18 or 20 different businesses, everything from audio production to marketing to radio to a veterinary business to a lot of real estate. But I think the string that sort of flows through all of the things that I've done is that I really like to go into things that I don't really understand, where there's a status quo that most people are following. And my brain seems to like to see the gaps between, the existence, what's there. And so like the definition of an entrepreneur is, if you look at, the French, you break down the word entrepreneur, entre in French means between, and preneur is to take. And so the way that I see being an entrepreneur is to take those opportunities that are in between what exists. In other words, we're creating things out of nothing. We're seeing opportunities that nobody else sees.
It's cool.
And that's what I've always done. I've gone into industries that I really didn't know anything at all, but I am a student. So when I get involved or interested in something, I get really deep into it. So real estate, as an example, I got into that, started buying properties, got my license because I couldn't find anybody that understood what I was doing. I really got involved in the creative side of real estate and doing things that people said were not possible or against the law or whatever it might be. And it was because it was pushing up against their status quo. So I did the same thing in veterinary. Went into the veterinary world, which is ultimately status quo, and built a company by standing out from the crowd and ruffling a lot of feathers in a very staid, boring, traditional, non-innovative industry. And so that's what I've always done. And I think underlying all of it for me, I've had the chance to meet and work with a lot of incredible human beings. People like, an event that I did years ago had the Dalai Lama and Richard Branson and Dr. Stephen R. Covey and H.W. de Klerk, or F.W. de Klerk, who freed Nelson Mandela. And that's where I think my interest and my intuition that there's more to learn about this world than business really started. And I think that's why I got into the event business. I didn't realize it, but I started to have breadcrumbs of things that I was only living a certain part of my being or my humanness. And I started to realize there's pieces of me that I've not integrated. So you said it before, like, you know me both from years ago, maybe 10, 12, 14 years ago, when you would not have described me as a spiritual or an emotional guy, because I was very head down, creating a lot of momentum and achievement and success. And that's what it was all about. But there was a soul in there, like my spiritual side, and there was a heart in there, my emotional side, that had withered and that were crying for attention. And so I would say that's what I've tried to do over the last few years, is start to honor the different elements of myself as a human being, because I think we do get so stuck in the doing of life and the to-do lists and all the things that, are going to provide external success. And we forget to actually remember that we are human beings. And, it sounds kind of trite because you hear it a lot, are you a human being or a human doing? But the irony is that it's trite, but it's true. And so that's kind of what I've done the last couple of years, is slowed myself down and done a lot of work internally, and realized that, when I was doing business coaching and high-level performance training in that, it was really the problem that I saw with the industry is that until you sort of roll back and deal with the underlying stream that's actually determining where you go in life. In other words, if you don't start to go back and deal with some of these things around your spirit and your heart, and you think that just by pushing hard and creating a bunch of success that you're going to be happy, that's where the disconnect is. And that's why I think today, and that's the way that society glamorizes, external measures of success. I mean, there's no question about that, right? So we all come up as children, and we want to have a big house and a fancy car and make lots of money and be able to travel. And, at the end of the day, none of that shit matters. I mean, that's what you ultimately learn. But the problem is most people have to go through some level of crisis to finally start asking the question, what the hell am I doing with my life? And so I've been there a few times. And so that's kind of what I've been fascinated with this last couple of years. So
here's thank you for sharing that. I think that's, there's so much value in that. Quick question on this something here, though. Here's a weird, interesting question. So you're 80 years old now, Greg. Mm-hmm. You look back. Like
I just turned 50 actually last week. 50. So yeah,
that's halfway. You're just,
exactly. I think it's a third of the way.
A third. Here we go. Yeah. So here's the thing. You're 80 years old or whatever. You're getting near your end of whatever your life would look like. You go back. Can you describe a life from this point to 80? Describe what your life would look like where you'd be just like thrilled. So perfect. This is the life. This is, let me describe this life I just had.
Starting from today, you mean?
Yeah. Like what happened to Greg?
Oh, I think it's pretty simple. For me, how I would answer that is, let's say when I was 50, if I'm looking back to, this point when I'm 80, I would say, when I was 50, I finally discovered who I truly was. And I was able to begin fulfilling my life purpose. And that is to love and be loved. I mean, I think that's the ultimate expression of what human beings are about. And you and I have talked about a little bit about this before. I've got some experience with plant medicine and psychedelic therapy and some of the using some of the more natural methods of dealing with some of our own internal shit, trauma and memories and the things that are locked up in our subconscious that we don't want to admit or deal with because it's too painful. And I've been dealing with a lot of that kind of stuff recently. And the thing that I've ultimately come to, and you'll find that most people that do plant medicine or a lot of real deep internal work, especially with, when it's around the idea of consciousness. So for example, people that perhaps, ayahuasca as an example, as a plant medicine, which has, the ancestry of thousands of years of use in South America. People will tell you that what they ultimately discover, that love is what it's all about. And so for me, I think I've come to that realization, certainly intellectually, and I think also from an emotional and spiritual perspective. So, maybe this sounds woo-woo. It probably does, especially for people that haven't, heard me talk in 6 or 8 years. But ultimately, that's what I would say is if I look back and I can say, God damn, like I really discovered and fell in love with who I am. And then I was through that able to love and be loved without condition. I don't know that there's anything more that you can do.
I love this conversation. I think, Greg, even the hesitation around, it's woo-woo. I'm so glad that we can actually maybe change this dialogue for the regular Joe.
Yeah.
Because this is maybe in the circles that you run in and I run in, that's a really accepted thinking of like, hey, I'm just going to love myself. And like, it's hippie talk to a lot of people, like my parents or grandparents, like it's just not even a thing. So what's cool is to have people like yourself that have an influence and a leadership in this world talking about it openly. I think this is what changes the next, like think about our kids, Greg.
Yeah.
If me and you were talking about this, maybe, just maybe, this becomes viewed as potentially on a higher pedestal of what's important in life. And maybe we affect the next generation that way by just even talking about putting love and being loved on the highest level. I'm very happy to be able to be part of that. Thank you for sharing that.
And I totally agree with you. And I think that this does inform the conversations I have. Like I've got a 12-year-old Cooper. And I mean, he's the light of my life. He really is. Like, I mean, one of the secondary answer that I would give you in terms of looking back, 50 years, blah, blah, blah. My greatest accomplishment was, Cooper is my greatest accomplishment, I would say now. But at 80, I would hope to say that the greatest accomplishment was that I indoctrinated into my child the knowledge that he's loved unconditionally. And when I was little, or not when I was little, when he was little, a year, 2, 3 years old, I can remember all I wanted for him was for him to be like when he grew up. I just want him to grow up, and you can fill in the blank, to be, what does everybody say?
Successful.
I just want my child to be happy. Like if you ask 100 parents.
Very, very simple. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
99% of them will tell you the word happy. And yet what a horrible objective to set to a child, that they have to go out there and find and so that they can be happy. Right. And so, I mean, if you ask me that today now, like my goal is that I have a child, I just want him to grow up and to be resilient. And in order to be resilient, I think love is sort of the secret, because when you feel loved and you love yourself and you're confident, you can overcome anything. But when you are seeking love and you don't feel like you've got love, you don't love yourself, and you seek it from other people, you get into the worst possible scenarios 100%. In every part of your life. That includes relationships, it includes business, it
partners,
includes everything.
Yeah.
And so, him and I have some interesting conversations. And like one of the things that I did when I was little, and this is perhaps like the greatest parenting advice that I can ever pass on to anybody, like somebody that is having a child that's, they're pregnant or they just had one, and, they know that I've got a 12-year-old. And if you meet Cooper, he's a pretty cool kid. He's very well adjusted, very kind. And they'll say, well, you seem to do something right with him. Like, what is it? What's the best advice you've got for me? And I will say, well, from a very early age, my goal with him was to make sure that he knew that no matter what, that my love for him was unconditional. And every parent wants to believe that that's what they're doing for their child. And even I do. I mean, I know there's things that I do that without realizing it, I'm unconsciously communicating that there's some conditions attached to my love. But
So
we have a lot of conversations about this. And like, so the point I was going to make is that when from the age that he was maybe 2 or 3, when he started understanding words and being able to communicate in that, I would say to him, hey buddy, so, like he played soccer when he was really little, like he was 3. And he would say, I really want to score a goal today. And I said, well, do you know how much more I would love you if you scored 3 goals? And he would look at me and he would say, oh, you'd probably love me a lot more.
You're like, no.
And I'd say, no.
I love that.
I wouldn't love you anymore at all.
Love that.
What happens if you go out there and you get thrown out of a game for being mean to another child? Am I going to love you any less? And he was like, no, like he wasn't sure because he knew like something it wasn't the obvious sense. Normally it would be, of course you wouldn't love me as much. Yeah. And I said, no, buddy, there's nothing you could do physically. There's nothing you could do that would make me love you less. Now there's things that you can do that would make me more proud or less proud, but I would still love you just as much. And that central message was the one that I indoctrinated him from when he was a very, very little. And, we've been lucky that we've raised a great kid to this point, and knock on wood, he's amazing. But I would say that that's the single the most important reason why he's turned out to be a kind, gentle, thoughtful, funny, young adult now, is because he knows that no matter what happens to him, his parents, I can only speak for myself, but he knows that his dad has his back and always will. And so most kids do not grow up with that kind of awareness. The most parents unknowingly create conditions and attachments to their love. And so that's why, again, we keep talking about love, and it's because I really believe it's the central issue to not just a lot of the difficulty and harm and challenge and pain that's in the world, but it's also the solution to a lot of what's going on out there, if only the conversation happened more often.
And I think we definitely connect on the same line. I love it. I love the real conversations with your kid. I think that's a massive, massive hole in this. I've got kids as well. My wife has taught me how to communicate with the kids. I had no clue. I was in a very bad childhood, no model at all. And we just tell that we talk to the kids for real. Like it's just that the value in that, how he feels valuable because you're talking to him real. I think that's amazing. And that connection to the kids I think it's a love that you're sharing that. I think it's needed. I think you need to talk about this. People don't know how to do it, Greg. How do you do this connection to a kid? Like, and how do I talk to him about, like, that's amazing. And the kids are brilliant.
Oh yeah. They're
brilliant. They understand everything.
Yeah. Well, and I think the bigger challenge to it is that showing up to your child in an unconditional way is very difficult because we all have our own traumas and programming that make it almost impossible depending on your experience and who you are. So for example, if you grew up and your parents indoctrinated you that in order to be successful and to be loved, you needed to go to university and become a professional, right? So maybe it's a doctor, lawyer, whatever.
It's just those adopted beliefs, right?
You see that. So that person grows up with that deep-seated subconscious belief that that's in order to be successful, that's what they have to do. And that's why they grind away and they go into a career that they don't even understand why they went in 20 years in because they're miserable. Yeah. But the problem is then they turn around and to their own child, they unconsciously do the very same thing. Is to apply conditions onto that child. And maybe it's the reverse. Maybe they as a child parent, they say, I'm never going to do that to my kid. Yeah. But then now they start to turn it around. And if the kid becomes passionate about something in particular, the parent starts to push them away from it. It's because like, oh, you don't have to do that. And now the parent frowns upon them doing that, allowing the child to feel like there's something wrong or that their parent loves them less because they're not supporting them. So, I mean, that's the challenge, is it?
Yeah. So that's personal growth for the parent. Like I have a belief that how can I love my kid unconditionally if I don't love myself unconditionally? And so I feel like, yep, you see it. You see the robotic comments, like you'll see it on TV, you'll see it around the soccer field and like, I'm proud of you, Johnny. I love you. Don't forget. Like, it's almost like they're saying the words, but they don't even know love.
Yeah.
Like how, like, it's like, oh, I love you unconditionally. I'm like, well, you're really high pressure and you really don't accept yourself unless you perform really well or whatever it is. They're not listening to you. They're watching you. I think that we have to connect the parenting to personal growth in yourself. Yeah. I don't think you can. So on a little bit of a change in direction here. I was thinking about you turning into more of a connected, spiritual, like you're talking about this stuff. And I think people are scared to lose the ability to be successful, business wisdom, strategy. Like I hear Gary Vee the other day on his podcast, and he says, oh man, I don't want to meditate because I'm scared of what's going to happen. And it makes me really excited to actually bring a business conversation to this table because I think it doesn't change that you're a really great business guy. It actually enhances your business guy side. Your advice is going to be at a different filter. I think people are scared to take the spiritual, emotional journey, self-development, because I think they're scared because there's that drive that might go away. There's that push, that unhealthy subconscious drive. So I feel like I want to ask you a few questions about business. Because I think today your advice around business would actually be more effective and more pinpointed than probably before because it's coming through love versus just strategy and finances. So just a couple questions. So if you were to give advice to a new business owner, what would you say, Greg?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a pretty broad question without any context. I think when I go back to my own history, all the external achievement, and this ties back into what you just said, like with say Gary Vee. Most people begin a business or have inklings of starting a business because they're in love with a particular idea or a particular modality or profession or whatever it is. So somebody that starts up a holistic nutrition coaching program or becomes a coach because they absolutely believe in the healing power of food or whatever the case might be. It starts with, I think, good intention and a pure love of something. Now, a lot of people don't do that. They, like, you see this on the internet a lot where it's like, start a business in 30 days. And so the way that they teach you to do that is to go to the market and find something find a gap somewhere, kind of like what we talked about initially. Like, go on to like these people that do drop shipping, for example, on Amazon. They start businesses. And the whole idea is go on Amazon and find who's searching for what products, which ones are the most popular. See if you can source those products 10% cheaper and sell them at 5 cents less than everybody else and make a whole, piss pot full of money. What a shitty business to be in.
Seriously.
Like, because there is absolutely no soul in something like that. And there's really no passion in it. Now, if you look at what Gary Vee is saying, from my perspective, and first of all, I mean, Gary is an extraordinary entrepreneur. He's very unique. And I think the problem is that his advice doesn't apply to most entrepreneurs. So he sends a lot of people off in the wrong direction. The whole hustle and grind mentality is complete horseshit. I believe that working hard and being passionate about something is one thing, but the fact that you have to even grind at all it's a telltale sign. Like, what the hell do you have to grind? You shouldn't have to grind something that is fulfilling you. So anyway, but let's look at what he said, because I've heard him say similar things and other people as well. Oh, I don't want to do meditation because, I'm afraid it's going to cause me to lose my drive and desire. Well, let's unpack what he's actually saying.
Let's do it.
What he's saying is that there's parts of him that he doesn't know or understand. And he's afraid of discovering those because right now what's happening is the external world is validating everything that he's doing because everybody thinks that Gary Vee is a second coming and a hero, an amazing, extraordinary entrepreneur. Everybody shares his videos, and I want to be like Gary Vee. And people, chase him down and ask him questions. And they sit, at his feet, waiting for his answer to tell them what to do. And he's got a lot of material wealth. He's got a lot of business wealth. He's a brilliant guy.
He is.
But if you ask me, Gary Vee has a huge blind spot. And it's almost like intuitively, he knows he has a blind spot, and he's afraid to ask the question of, what am I missing? And when somebody says, oh, I don't want to meditate because I'm afraid it's going to interrupt like what I'm doing, it's like, that's the whole fucking point.
100%.
And so it's almost like he knows that if he were to do that, it would disrupt the flow of what's going on right now. And right now it seems like everything's good. And maybe truly in his heart, in like a dark room when he sits there alone and he thinks about his life and everything else, maybe he's completely content and happy and thrilled and that's all possible. I'm not saying that's not true. Yeah. I'm just saying when somebody says they don't want to do something because it could, why would I want to do that? It could take away my drive. I think the question then becomes, well, why would that be a bad thing? So let's look at that. Let's say that he did start meditating and he realized, holy shit, working 80 hours a week is making me miserable. Yeah. Doing these things, like my health, I don't, maybe he starts to realize that
he
all
actually
the
has started, like I've listened to quite a bit of his content. He just started shifting the last while regarding, he's starting to tell people, I regret not taking time away. And he's starting to come out with that content.
Wait 10 years, Ben. I suspect in 10 years, the Gary Vee is going to be like, man, I worked way too hard. It wasn't worth it. And now I'm really enjoying life because I figured out what the hell it's really all about.
I can totally see that.
So I really find it interesting when somebody says, well, what if I lose my drive to succeed and achieve? Congratulations. Mm-hmm. Because the way that I see it is that if your underlying desire and drive is to be successful and to achieve, then you've got a problem, because that should not be your undying motivation. Your undying motivation should be, how do I serve other people? How do I uplift others? How do I leave this planet a better place than when I found it? That's really what it should be about. And that's when you see the greatest leaders, they're not driven just by a bunch of money. That's not what's driving them.
Exactly.
I mean, look at a guy like Elon Musk.
It's solving problems, real problems.
And Elon Musk, in a lot of ways, I think he's absolutely off his rocker. I don't believe with a lot of the things that he says. I think he's a little bit of a demagogue in his own mind sometimes about things. But if you look at what really drives him, it's not really money. Like, he has put everything on the line several times, and he continues with some of the ridiculous things that he does. But it's because he really believes in service of humanity. He really wants to help make this a better planet and a better universe. And so that's what drives him. Richard Branson, I've had a chance to spend time with him, and it's not money that drives him. Like, it really isn't. And so the people that are so driven and ambitious and successful and have all this material wealth and external validation, they're terrified of losing that, because I believe down, and I was there too. Like, this is not like I'm preaching to, holier than thou. Like, this was my whole problem. I thought that having, $100 million portfolio and all this stuff, I thought it made me happy. And all it did is it validated me, and it temporarily filled the void that I had internally, that because I didn't love myself, I had to find love and acknowledgement and acceptance outside of myself. And so if you're saying to yourself, well, I'm not sure that I want to get to know myself better because I'm afraid I'll lose my drive, that in and of itself is a great reason to think about it, because the reason that you're accomplishing and you're driven and you're ambitious and all that is probably a distraction from the work that you actually need to do.
It's funny. It makes me think of, I won't put his name out there, but guy I know, and he's close to me. We were going to go to a Phil McKernan Ireland retreat together. And he's a religious man. And he backed out last minute. And he knows my story of growing up. I was, in a religious environment and challenging that in my own self. And he sent an email and he says, you know what? He goes, I'm just too scared to, lose my faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, holy crap, that faith is not even real. Like, it's
Well,
like you're scared to lose it or something. You know what I mean? It's almost the same.
I think what that is, again, that's that intuition, like I was saying before, that deep down you sort of know that if you pull that thread, that you're going to find information and answers that you probably, in the current context of your life, you don't want answers to.
Totally.
So as an example, and I don't know anything about him, but let's say that, for example, if he's very religious, faith is really important to him.
Yeah.
Chances are faith is very important to his family. So his parents, his whole familial structure.
Yeah.
If he's in a relationship, faith is very important to his partner and potentially to his children. He's taught his children how important faith is. So when you look at it from that context, and then his deep down intuition, his higher self is saying to him, if you pull this string, you may find answers you don't like. So let's assume that he does that. He pulls the string, realizes, holy shit, religion is just dogma. It's this construction around, whatever it is, whatever he might find, right? Or that he just doesn't believe in it, and he believes in a different spirituality or power or whatever the case. What does that do to his life? I mean, it literally blows up the entire context he has.
Every angle for generations, a wife, its kids, is like community.
Right. And it's what at its core, what it does is it challenges his identity. It challenges who he is, because I'm a man of faith.
Yeah.
I lead my children by faith. And all those things that he would say suddenly become into question. And one of the things I have learned through like painful experience is that when you go through a transformation and how you previously defined yourself is either taken away or removed, or even if you do it voluntarily. So like in my case, as an example, one of the times was when I sold my business. I had a business for 11 years, and that's how everybody knew me.
Yeah.
And I sold it, and it was successful, in selling it. But I had this existential crisis because I realized I attached who I am to that business and that identity, and that's not who I am. So who the hell am I now? And that's what's happening, by the way. That's what we've seen through coronavirus. That's why it's been, in my view, so difficult for so many people because, I've been an employee for 17 years at this company. That's what I do. That's how everybody knows me. And suddenly I got laid off and now I don't have that job. And who the hell am I? And oh my God, the company's gone that I used to work for and that I loved.
Now what?
So if I'm not that person and that company's not even real, doesn't exist anymore, who the hell am I? And so I think there's a lot of existential crisis going on right now in the world. And I think it's, in some ways, it's painful, but it's also healthy because it's causing people to ask the kind of questions that you're asking me right now, and for people to think about some of this stuff around.
So good.
Who am I really?
Yeah.
And who am I think is actually kind of a bad question because it leads to boxing yourself into these roles and identities.
Mom, dad, like that's not who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could ask yourself, why am I?
So there's another question. If you had a magic wand right now, what would you change? Do anything. No limitations. What would you change? It's the first thing that you would do. Magic wand, change anything.
You mean to me personally or the world?
Whatever you want, whatever comes up. If you had a magic wand, it's no limitations. What comes up?
If I could wave a magic wand, I would eliminate trauma.
Wow.
Period. That I don't know that there's a bigger shift that you could cause the world, because if you look at most of the things that are happening right now that are problematic, that are painful, that are difficult, that's where conflict comes from, is trauma. In relationships, in business, in governments. I mean, you become the leader of the free world, and fundamentally you're dealing with massive childhood trauma that continues to resurrect itself and create what he's created.
Yeah.
I mean, you're dealing with, so trauma. I mean, that's
great answer.
you look at addiction, for example, like some people would say, well, I would want to eliminate addiction from the world. That's a pretty ambitious goal, right? But the problem with that, well, it's not a problem, but sure, you eliminate addiction. That's fantastic. But what is addiction? Addiction is unprocessed, unconscious trauma. That's all it is. The reason that people become addicted to something, anything, is because they haven't processed. There's a trauma underlying that addiction.
Yeah.
And
I think we need to clarify on trauma. I love, because I know that we talked about this off camera. Just to give me the definition of trauma. We always think addiction and abuse, rape, or beating up, or all these really big ones. Is that trauma, or could be more?
So it's a great question. And yeah, I'm glad we didn't sort of gloss over that, because that might make people think, oh, well, I wasn't raped or I wasn't abused. I used to say that my entire life. Like up until a few years ago, I used to say I had a great childhood. It was really boring. Like nothing really happened to me. So I didn't have any trauma. And so there's a fantastic human being. His name's Dr. Gabor Mate. And he's in Vancouver. And he's become one of the world's top experts on trauma and addiction. And so he's just a fascinating human being. And so he does a lot of work with addiction and trauma. And so I when I think about what is trauma and what is addiction, I look to him, because he's already done the work of trying to, figure out what does this really mean. And if you ask Dr. Mate, what he would tell you is trauma is unconscious or unprocessed. We've disconnected from ourselves. So trauma is the process of disconnecting from ourselves. Okay, wow. So what does that mean? Wow. So someone might say, well, I was raped. That's my trauma. And the truth is, that's not your trauma. Being raped was an act, but the trauma is how you processed that act within yourself. Amazing. And so what most people do is when they incur some kind of trauma, either because something happens to them that shouldn't have happened, which is in the case of like a lot of the traumas that people think about, right? External trauma. So rape, violence against, abuse, neglect, your parents hitting you, those kinds of things. Those are things that happened that shouldn't have happened. But the much bigger pool of trauma are the things that should have happened, but didn't happen. So for example, your parent, in that moment, you desperately needed them to show you love or to be there for you, and they didn't do it. That creates a massive trauma, because the response in you is to feel unsafe, and you start to create all of these rules and boundaries and beliefs to cope with that. And this happens when you're in childhood. And as a child, it's too painful to try to process the idea that your parent is not there for you and that you're unsafe, because that literally means that you're in threat of your survival's at stake. So you start creating all of these accommodating beliefs. And so what Mate basically will say is that when trauma develops inside you, what happens is you're turning away from yourself. You're disconnecting from yourself because you're too afraid to actually admit or even perceive the fear or the act, the emotions that it causes. You disconnect from yourself. And so as that continues through your life, you start to seek out things that allow you to escape and disconnect from yourself.
Even certain relationships.
Well, and that's what addiction is, right? Yeah. Addiction is an escape from
feeling
whatever it is. It's an escape from feeling those feelings. And the problem that we all have is everybody's gone through it. Like there's not one person walking the earth that doesn't have trauma. So anybody who thinks that they don't have any trauma to deal with, well, that literally is the land, that's like a flag to say you have trauma, but you're just in denial about it. And I mean, I could give you 100 examples of how no matter what perfect experience you give me that somebody had as a child, there's a trauma that can be found in it. And so it's not about, blaming your parents that they traumatized you, because we all do it.
This is trauma's normal. And that's what we're trying to say here. It's just normal. It's like,
it happens to all of us.
Yeah. Like, what's your trauma versus I had trauma? Like, it's what's your trauma?
Yeah.
Is it neglect? Is it abuse? Is it whatever? Right. Like, I love this. I love it. It's very important. This is a really good, hopefully it's connecting the dots with some people going, oh, maybe I have a little something there. Maybe I am avoiding those emotions. Maybe I am holding myself back I had a great family. Like, I had a coaching call the other day with a lady, and she, it was amazing. Like, this huge moment of breakthrough. And I'm sure you've seen it too. And she brought up her dad telling her not to cry.
Right. What is that telling the child?
Her whole life was affected, Greg. I watched her just completely bloom after this.
Because she wasn't allowed to express her emotion, that she was bad.
Yeah, be strong. How about that? She was
weak.
Be strong.
All those things. That's what she learned from that. Or you talk to the
dad.
We can go through every example of, like, as a child, right? Because some people say, no, I was like for me, for example, telling you earlier on, right? Like, I was telling my child that, that I love him unconditionally and everything. But I guarantee there have been countless times in moments where I was completely unaware of it and unconscious of it, where I did something or said something or didn't say something that made him feel unsafe in that second.
Huge.
And, he internalized some of that. And so you can't avoid the truth is you can't avoid fucking your kids up. Like, that's the path of being a human. Is there's going to be things that happen in your life that traumatize you, that make things difficult. And it's not about pretending that they're not there or wishing that you didn't do that to your kids. I mean, obviously there's a lot of, like, unnecessary things you can do. So it's doing the best you can, but not beating yourself up for traumatizing your child, but figuring out what are those core beliefs that you need to try to instill into your child to give them a fighting chance as they grow up, that these traumas don't start to absolutely overwhelm them.
I think about what you did with your son, and I think I'm almost wondering, is that so we traumatize our kids? Do you think having an honest conversation with them and teaching them how to process that through that, is that the way that we need to do that?
Children are incredibly intelligent, and, like, we like to pretend and, like, talk in high voices and, like, use funny words, and we can't tell them about this, can't tell them about that. But so as an example, like maybe 6 months ago, so my son and I were having a conversation about, I was telling him this story that I received from an elder. And it was basically that inside all of us, we have an owl. There's this inner owl, what I call, and the inner owl knows everything. Like, he sees everything that happens to you. He's aware of it. He can feel your feelings, and he knows all. Just like, the character, if you think of a character in any kids show where there's an owl, the owl's always the smart one, right? The owl's always wise. It's usually the leader. It's usually the one that sits back and isn't loud, but knows everything. And so we all have that inner owl in us that knows the right thing, but the owl doesn't speak. The owl only ever asks one question, right? And the question is, what sound does an owl make? The question is, who? And that owl is always asking, who am I going to be in this particular moment? Who am I going to be in this action? Am I going to be myself, or am I going to be accepted? That's the fundamental question that we're asking right from, when we're infants. And so that, we grow up with that. And that is our higher self. But then we also have this inner fox, and the fox is clever and cagey, and the fox is not interested in us. The fox is interested in its own motivations and takes us off the path. And so we have this internal conflict between the owl and the fox. And everybody has this. Now, the characterizations that I'm using here, because it's difficult to have a conversation with your child, depending on their age, about the idea of what ego is, right? So what is ego? Most people think ego is arrogance and thinking better of themselves and conceit and everything. Ego in what it really means has nothing to do with any of that. Ego is that force inside us that is well intended to try to protect us, but actually screws us out of becoming fully human. That's really what the fox is in this story, right?
He's clever.
Very clever, and convinces us of things, like very powerful. And that's why you can never really trust your mind.
It's so
And
true.
so anyway, so I was having this conversation with Cooper, and he was just like enthralled. He's like, "Oh
He
man,
understands
yeah,
it.
like I totally can see that." And so then I said to him, do you ever hear voices in your head? And he was like, yeah. And he was almost like suspicious, like, how do you know that? Because he obviously never had this conversation with anybody. And I was
Amazing.
like, well, isn't that cool? You actually you can literally hear a conversation in your head. Now, there are some people that don't hear a voice in their head, but I mean, they're a minority in the world. But some people listening might say, well, I never hear a conversation, which is kind of fascinating in itself. But most people, the vast majority of people, can relate to the idea of, you do something and you're about to, I don't know, you're putting dishes away, and you look away for a second, you grab a glass and it slips and it smashes on the ground, and you say to yourself, "Oh, you idiot," or whatever, right? Or that was stupid. Like that's the ego. That's the inner voice that's there all the time. It's just whether you're, I think, listening and tuning into it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's like, yeah, like there's this voice. I'm like, okay, cool. Is that voice usually positive or usually negative? And for me, this was kind of a learning opportunity to see, like, I've never had this conversation with
Totally.
like a little kid,
Love it.
right? And he's like, and he thought about it. Mostly positive, I think. And I'm like, okay, is it ever negative? Well, sometimes, but mostly it's
cool.
positive. And I was
cool.
like, dude,
How encouraging.
keep that voice positive. Because that's really the problem, is most of us beat ourselves to hell 10 times more than the rest of the world does, right?
Totally.
But anyway, but this was sort of like the cool question after all that. And I was like, well, yeah, so who's that voice? And he's like, well, I mean, it's me. And I'm like, okay, but who's hearing the voice?
Yeah, I love it.
And then he was like,
Mind blown.
his head kind of blew up, and he was like,
But he's just a kid and he gets it.
so it helped him realize that little voice, that fox voice that you hear, isn't you at all. That's not who you really are. And anyway, so
Amazing.
Yeah, I think we can have these kinds of conversations with kids. And in fact, I went and did a presentation on the owl and the fox and fitting in versus belonging at Cooper's school to 100 and some grade sixes.
Love it.
And the feedback I got was absolutely phenomenal. So I've done that talk now at a couple of schools, and I was going to do some more until COVID happened. But
Greg, that talk is not just for kids. I could see you doing a keynote, legitimate keynote.
I agree.
At like the top university in the fucking world, and you're coming in talking about an owl. And I think I like literally see it written on the wall, because I feel like that's how people want to communicate anyways. Just tell me
Well, it's
that.
stories, right?
It's
And
so
they want to
great.
understand it.
It's good for me to hear. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's so good. I can't wait to, but you also gave me a tool to communicate with my kids. I think it's a very cool way to keep something very simple.
I'm working on, I've been told, a bunch of people have said, you got to do a book, you got to do video or whatever. And I actually had it. I had a talk that I was scheduled to give at a tech, it was a startup.
That's what I'm thinking.
High level tech conference.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
And man, that would have stood out at that conference. But I really think people would have been like, holy shit, that was the most meaningful talk of everything. Like,
it's almost like, I think about you, I'm the theme guy. I'm like a dot connector. And it's almost like you're bringing soul to business. You're almost like bringing that soul, like everyone wants to talk about startups and everything. And you're like, here's a little bit of soul. Let's put some real life into this business.
Well, and again, I think it comes
like
back to this realization I've made, is that most people are building businesses on top of a foundation that's, metaphorically on sand. And they're not connected to themselves. Personally, they really don't love themselves. They're seeking all this external validation. And that's why I think most business problems, like most of the problems that you have in business, regardless of your business, those are just personal issues that are dressed up as business problems. So for example, people that complain about their staff, we have shitty staff and we can't keep good people, and the people drive them nuts.
Yeah.
Well, if you step back and really look at what's going on there, I'm willing to bet that there's some deep personal work that needs to happen there in order to reconcile the fact that maybe you don't really have a healthy connection with yourself internally, And that is a barrier to you being able to consciously and open-heartedly connect with other human beings. And I know that from experience because, again, 10, 15 years ago, I was completely shut off from all of that. And I was not, a good guy to work with. People respected me. They knew that I was intelligent and I was successful. And they absolutely sought me out for business advice, but nobody ever asked me for relationship advice. And it's because that wasn't my thing. And again, over the last few years, I think I've kind of come to realize that business success or failure has less to do with the business and far more, like 90% of it has 100%. To do with the person behind it. That's why
100%.
Somebody can have a fantastic business and it absolutely implodes. And it's because they haven't dealt with their own demons.
Yeah.
And I saw that in the coaching clients, right? I would see people that it was clear what they needed to do and they could not do it in their business because it somehow violated these accommodating subconscious beliefs they had about themselves that either kept them back from doing the things they needed to do or kept causing them to do things for the wrong reasons that completely screwed their business up.
I experienced it so much in my life. Like, so I self-sabotage, go the wrong direction. You try to partner with someone you put on a pedestal, turns out to be a complete loser. Like, it's just on and on and on. And it was all sorts of my own stuff. And I've committed my life to helping people get out of their way because of that. Because I think it's a waste of time. I feel like such a waste of time. Go to friggin' Google. Go to Google if you just want business. Because at the end of the day, like you just said, like you try to coach people, you're super intelligent, super smart. You've literally got the guaranteed steps to success, and you couldn't help the guy that gets himself in his own way. And it's like, we all have that. I love that. And that's literally fitting for why you're on the show too. Now we're coming near the hour here. And, I think we want to wrap it up. We could definitely, I could jam with you all day, Greg. I think I love the inner quest is extremely attractive to me. I think that's, I love it. The study of what's really going on behind the scenes is something I'm just obsessed about because I think it's everything. One last question. I don't know how fast we'll wrap this one up, but just one last question is, how do you raise your self-acceptance?
Because you put it on a big question.
You put it on the website. One of your things you said, you help people raise their self-acceptance and get more connected to yourself. And I'm thinking, like, I obviously know this is a 15 episode question. I get it. Yeah. But in a summary, in a moment, like if you had to be forced to do it in a couple minutes, how do you raise the self-acceptance or connection to yourself?
Yeah, I'd say it's a journey. It's not a tactic and it's not a strategy. It's not something that you do this and the result is that your self-acceptance increases, right? I think most people are deluded into their existing life as to why they're doing the things they're doing and what's driving them. And so, on the scale of competence and consciousness. So when you're doing something, making a mistake or whatever the case might be, I mean, you sort of go through this process. You start out with unconscious incompetence. So in other words, if you've never thought about the idea of trauma, let's say, right? And like the word competent or incompetent isn't to suggest smarts or you're too dumb to know how to do it, or competence is just an ability or a knowing on how to do something. Yeah. Right. And that usually comes from practice, from skill, from awareness. So you start out in unconscious incompetence, right? You don't even know what you don't know. Like you just never ask the questions. Yeah. When you start realizing for whatever reason, some event brings this to you. So for example, like maybe this podcast is going to be for some people, they're going to be like, well, I've never thought that I had trauma. I wonder if I do. And they start pulling that string and wondering, well, this really was upsetting, or they go through whatever modality that they choose. And it could be reading a book. It could be like therapy. It could be a whole bunch of things. They start to ask the questions. And then what happens is they become conscious of their incompetence. In other words, they become aware of what they don't know. So now they know what they don't know. They realize, oh man, that wakes them up to starting to learn the whatever that body of work is, whatever that work on themselves is, they need to go through. So now they start to do the work, and now they start to become competent. So now they start to realize, well, the reason why I've had so much difficulty with relationships is when I was a child, I learned my mom's love was very conditional. My mom was very conditional with me. And so what I picked up from that was that if I wanted her love, I couldn't be honest with her. I'm just giving this as one simple example of 1,000 that is programming people have. So let's pretend you grow up with a mom who loves you, but when you do something wrong, and it's just she won't hug you, and she removes her love and makes you feel like you're bad and you're wrong when you do certain things a certain way. So then what you do is your compensation may be, I'm just not going to show her when I make mistakes or whatever. So now you start hiding the things that you do as a child that you think she's going to be upset about. Now you start lying and you start being disingenuous to her. And now you show up in the way that you think you need to show up in order for her to love you. And so you start to build this muscle. And the muscle is, if I want her love, I can't be honest with her. Now think about what that does for you. If you're a man, for example, think about what that does for you when you're 30 and you're in your second year of like dating a woman that could be the one and everything. If your programming is that I can't be honest with a woman I love because then she won't love me, how do you think that's going to work out in your relationship? So, and the reason I bring that particular one up is, ask me how I know that, right? I had some of that experience. And so now you start to become aware of, holy shit. Now it's conscious, and it's conscious because you're aware of it. Yep. And it starts to become a competence when you start to actually peel back the layers and work with that and start to heal that particular issue. And you start to realize, wow, like, the reason she loves me is because I'm fully and unconditionally honest with her. Like, what? It's totally against everything you've ever experienced in your life. And suddenly you have the best relationship that you've ever had in your entire life. Well, surprise. Yeah. And like when I say it this way, it sounds so obvious and so, easy, right? And what happens is you start to practice that, and that's how you start to become. So you just start telling the truth and being honest and having difficult conversations and feeling vulnerable and all that stuff. And eventually what happens is it eventually becomes a part of who you are, and it becomes unconscious competence, because now you don't even have to think about it. You don't have to practice it.
That's great.
But the problem is, once you hit the threshold of like unconscious incompetence to conscious, that's where the real work begins, because that's where, for example, back to the Gary Vee conversation, Gary Vee has an unconscious incompetence because there's things that he doesn't even know that he doesn't know. But he's at that threshold when he starts to say to himself, I don't think I want to go that path because I don't want it to whatever the result is.
The cost seems high.
He's literally at that point where the line is of consciousness, and he's purposely avoiding it. And by the way, that's what most people do, because that's the easy path. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if you really want to be a full human being, and like one of the phrases that I love that I use a lot is to choose to be human. You have to choose to be human. It's not just granted to you. It's not something that happens by default. It's hard work to be a real human being. And so, that's what I would say that I've dedicated my life to, and that's what I'm working towards and trying to help other people start to identify these things and have these like holy shit moments of like,
love it.
I didn't realize that. So, Greg, that's I don't know if that answered the question, to be honest, but
it doesn't matter. It's so good. I think it just walks you through an entire process of self-awareness to self-acceptance, to that aha, to that breakthrough, to actually being able to have the depth of relationship and realizing, holy shit, I had a big part to play in this. And that's the process. And I think that's really cool. What's up next, Greg? What's happening? What's going on? Like, what's coming with Greg?
Well, I've got
What's next?
I've got a few different projects I'm working on. So I'm actually just about to launch a podcast. Um, I've been writing and doing a lot of this internal work and a lot of processing and trying to distill some of these ideas down into frameworks and ideas that people can actually pick up and understand. Because I find it difficult, like when I pick up a book that was written by a psychiatrist or
Heavy,
a researcher or whatever, they're pretty hard, they're pretty dense to really get into, and that's what I've always been told. Like I went back a couple of years, maybe a year ago, and I went back to a handful of my coaching clients from like 6, 8, 10 years ago. And I said to them, what do you think my unique ability is? What are the top 3 things that I'm world-class at doing that you don't know anybody like it, or, whatever, however I framed it. And the idea is to get people to shine a light on the things that they really think that you're magical at. Right. And we're all magical at something. It's just most people never figure out what that is. And by and large, the feedback was almost all identical. And essentially what came back is two things really. One was that I'm really good at taking complicated ideas and distilling them down into a way that people can really understand them and get their hands around them and actually implement them. Awesome. And then the other one was that I tell it like it is, and I tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And so those two things were the drive. Like every single response I got had at least at least both of those in there, and some other other things as well. Yeah. So I think that is what my unique ability is, and so that's what I've decided to do, is to focus my attention on this, on all the stuff we talked about today. Yeah. And what are some super simple models I can create that people can say, "Wow, I can actually get my head around this. Nice. Wow, I can relate to this. That is me," and work them through to make their life, just better in some way, and to help them, choose to be human. That's really what it comes down to. So,
what's your podcast called? Do you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been working on like the word that is sort of my word is unperfect. Right. Yeah. And so like I've got a blog, that's going to be the name of a book that I'm writing. But the podcast and kind of the name or the brand that I'm working in this, what we talked about today, is Alightment. And Alightment is actually a real word. And what it essentially means, to me, is Alightment is that state of alignment when the light inside you starts to shine bright. That's really what it's about. And it's the visual would be, you've got a lock, like a padlock, and each lock, when you look at it, like a cross section, each of the tumblers is like mixed up, right? So you can't see through because they're all turned around. But the moment that you align all of those tumblers in a certain way with the right key, light passes through and the lock unlocks. And so it's called Alightment. It's not out yet, but it's about to be published. And basically it's going to be conversations exactly like this. Awesome. With some of the people that I learned from, some of my friends that have, extraordinary things. It's just talking with ordinary people about extraordinary things on how to light up and be in alignment. Because for me, that's what being aligned and fully alive is the secret. It's not about being happy. If you're fully aligned and you're on fire,
happy is a side effect.
Trust me, you're happy, man. Like that's what it's about.
And I think I like how you said that, because I've got to experience it too. And it's like alignment, you're on fire. It's a direct tie to energy. And it's like, exactly. Like I just went through something and it's like, yep, my energy went nuts as soon as I found this alignment. Put the alignment in, you got energy. And it's like, I love how that alignment and fire, I love that.
Well, it's like a chiropractor. I mean, that's what a chiropractor does, is the intention is to align your spine so that there aren't energetic blocks so that the energy can flow. And, likewise, that's kind of how I see Alightment. So so I'm excited about it. Cool. I think it's going to change some people's lives, and I love doing this stuff. So anyway.
Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Greg, thank you so much for being on the show. It's a absolute laser perfect fit. I think the audience will eat it up. I cannot wait to share it. We've got a ton of gold in this episode. Super, super proud to have you. Thank you so much.
I love doing it. So thanks, Ben. Appreciate the invite, and we'll do this anytime you want.
Awesome. We may have to. Cheers. Okay.